I wanted to show you a method I've been using to more easily and accurately check for IVs in Pokemon Emerald and I guess the Generation 3 games. We're going to be glossing over a lot of things in this video, however we do have a lot of other guides and things that dive a little bit further in case you want to learn a little more, and I'm also going to leave all the links to everything we're discussing in the description below. So kind of using my current save state as an example for breeding for Trapinch, let's say I got a couple eggs, we just hatched them, however now I want to check their IVs. One thing I forgot to mention too is in the initial stages of breeding, I will go to one of Smogon's breeding guides. They're part 2, I'll show it on the screen now. Part 2 of their breeding guide, if you scroll down, they're going to have a whole chart of all stats at level 5 a Pokemon can have, which indicates they have about 31, or they could have 31 IVs or perfect IVs within that stat. You also have to kind of factor in some natures and things, but definitely read this for a little bit more information. But essentially what I do is I check the Pokemon that I have or I'm breeding. I write down all the stats that could be perfect or what those stats would be if they were perfect. As I'm going through like the breeding process and hatching eggs, I will refer to this table or I'll write it on like a sticky note. If the stats at level 5 of the hatched Pokemon are kind of in the realm or along the ballpark of what this table is saying, I will say, okay, this Pokemon probably has a higher chance of having good IVs. Like one example of Trapinch is I really want it to have perfect attack. What this 16 is telling me in the table and what the 16 is telling me with the Pokemon that I hatched is that the IVs are quite high at this level. That is just, again, baseline information. It's not perfect, but it at least gives you a small gauge to start with. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to fly over to the battlefront here, and we're going to check the old guy to actually see what he says. He's just above the Pokemon Center over here. So when we talk to him, he's going to give us 2 pieces of information. He's going to tell us first the overall IVs of the Pokemon. So this is overall impressive. So here we go over this little cheat sheet. So the overall IVs are between 120 and 150. So overall, Pokemon is actually pretty strong. And he says best aspect of this is attack. It's flawless. So if we look at the other dialogue, flawless means 31. It's pretty much perfect. Actually, it is perfect. However, if there are multiple IVs within like that same category, you will have to talk to this guy multiple times. However, this can get pretty like time consuming and not really necessary at some points. I did check this guy about 5 times and he did eventually say attack and speed, which is pretty good. And what I was kind of hoping for would get transferred over. See, there we go, to speed. However, I know 3 things now. It has 2 perfect IVs in attack and speed, and impressive in nature, which overall has pretty high IVs. This is definitely a Pokemon that I want to see further to see if I should train it. Like, how are the other IVs? Are they high enough or are they lacking in certain, I guess, categories? So what I'm going to do now, I've identified a Pokemon that I consider to be quite strong. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to save the game, and we're going to use a whole bunch of rare candies and level it up and then throw it into an IV calculator. What this is going to do is it's going to give us a more accurate, or it's going to give us higher stats, which we can then put into one of the online calculators, which is going to give us a more accurate range of potential IVs. If you don't have rare candies, one of the things you can do is level up a couple Zigzagoons and turn them into Linoons, and then at higher levels they have a higher chance of dropping the rare candies. And obviously if you put in 99 or it was 95 rare candies, you would have a Pokemon level 100, and then you would pretty much know exactly the IVs. However, in my opinion, it's not really necessary. As long as you get the Pokemon to a higher level than level 5, you're at least getting a better gauge on what the IVs are. So you don't need 100 rare candies to do this, but you need a good amount. So now that the Pokemon is a higher level, I will then take these stats and we will put it into this calculator. There's no reason to include the EVs, obviously, because we didn't do anything with that. So after putting this into the calculator, I can see that HP EVs are between 10 and 14. Attack is 31. We know that for sure. Defense is quite low. Special attack is quite high, 23 to 26, which is good. High special defense, and we got perfect speed. So overall, assessing this Pokemon for the first time, I really want it to be, again, perfect speed and perfect attack, which we do have. The low defense and HP are a little concerning, but the special defense is quite high, above 20, I think is pretty good. This Pokemon is lacking a little bit of categories with the stats, but overall it's actually quite good. And for the amount of time I actually put into training, or I guess breeding this, and we got this product, I think it's quite good. One thing I'll do too is we'll make sure you definitely quit the game before you accidentally save it again, and then you lose all your rare candies. But what I will do is I will screenshot this. I will save it as like Trapinch, let's say 1, Trapinch like 5, something like that, something to give it a name. And then I will go to the name rater which is in Slateport City. We'll fly to it right now. And I will either name the Pokemon with the perfect IVs, or I will name the Pokemon with whatever I save that screenshot as. This way, if I go back, I know exactly what IVs that Pokemon has. It kind of depends on what you're doing with it and whatever, but at least gives you some options on how to be organized and not lose track of what Pokemon has what IVs. Not drag this video out too far, that is pretty much what I do. First thing I do before I even start breeding is I'll write down on like a sticky note on the Smallgon table, like roughly what IVs or what stats at level 5 are considered to be high IVs within the Pokemon. Then we'll hatch some eggs. I'll go over to the dude in the battle frontier. The old guy is going to tell us some information. It's going to probably help us decide if we want to spend some more time, level it up, and then check the IVs. If the Pokemon is like average, I'm not checking that. Like that's just a bad Pokemon. The better than average is typically like okay, but impressive and outstanding, definitely going to be checking those, especially if they have more than one perfect IV in the stats that we want. And then yeah, put it in the calculator, write it down, and then reset the game just so you have an understanding of what that Pokemon's IVs are. Anyway though, not going to drag the video out. Hopefully this helps. Everything we discussed and showed in the video will be in the link in the description. Take care everybody.